Welcome to Inner Songwriting Theory. Today we're going to be looking at seventh chords. I recommend a basic understanding of major and minor triads before we begin. Seventh chords are an incredibly important tool to songwriters. They have a very distinctive sound compared to your regular major and minor chords. They stand out a mile and they can make your music stand out in the same way. Seventh chords are the principal chords of certain genres including jazz, house, modern R&B, blues, funk and soul. With that said, seventh chords are still found in rock, reggae, folk, classical and nearly every genre you can think of. Learning these types of chords will allow you to access the sounds of these genres and incorporate them into your music. On top of that, seventh chords are the gateway to understanding and playing chords such as ninths, 11ths and 13ths, as well as understanding the concept of functional chords. Let's find out exactly what they are. Seventh chords are a type of four-note chord. The first seventh chord to appear in regular use was the dominant seventh chord, which features in early classical music as well as the folk and traditional music of Europe. 200 years later, Romantic period composers were freely experimenting with harmony, including major and minor seventh chords, whilst simultaneously in the United States, the dominant seventh chord was taking on a new role as a root chord in African American blues and jazz, as well as ragtime. In jazz music, seventh chords are often the simplest form of harmony, in place of triads. Meanwhile, blues amongst other genres gave birth to rock and roll, passing on the dominant seventh chord in turn to future forms of rock and pop. Thanks to all this experimentation, we've been gifted some very unique sounds. Let's not waste them. Major chords can be constructed by taking the root, third and fifth of our relevant major scale. For example, if I wanted to build a G major chord, I would write out my G major scale, extract and isolate the root, G, third, B, and fifth, D. This is why we say chords have a root, third, and fifth. A minor chord also has a root, third, and fifth. However, the only difference is the third is flattened by one semitone. So we say a minor triad features a root, flat third, and fifth instead. For example, in order to find out the notes in G minor, we can take our major triad, G, B, and D, and lower the third by one semitone so that B becomes B flat, leaving us with our G minor triad of G, B flat, and D. The only difference between triads and seventh chords is that seventh chords feature one more note. While a major chord features a root, third, and fifth, a major 7 features a root, third, fifth, and seventh. Once again, we need our major scale to begin. If I wanted a G major 7 chord, I would take my G major scale and isolate the root, third, fifth, and seventh, G, B, D, and F sharp. When played together, form a G major 7. Again, this works with any major scale. If I extract the root, third, fifth, and seventh of my D major scale, I end up with D, F sharp, A, and C sharp, giving me a D major 7 chord. Once I understand my major 7 chord, I can use it as a basis to find the rest of my seventh chords. For example, while a major 7 chord features a root, third, fifth, and seventh, a minor 7 chord uses the formula root, flat third, fifth, and flat 7. In this case, if I wanted to find a G minor 7, I would take my G major 7 made up of G, B, D, and F sharp, and flatten the third so that B became B flat, and flatten the seventh so that F sharp became F, leaving me with G, B flat, D, and F, which when played together form a G minor 7. Again, this formula applies to all minor 7 chords. If I applied the same formula to D major 7 and flattened the third so that F sharp became F, and flattened the seventh so that C sharp became C, I'd be left with my D minor 7 chord made up of D, F, A, and C. All seventh chords have their own formula, with flattened intervals and in some cases sharpened intervals, so be prepared to work out that brain. Now that you have the basics, let's look in depth at 3 of the most popular types of seventh chords: major 7s, minor 7s, and 7s. As we've already discussed, the major 7 chord uses the formula of 1, 3, 5, 7. As long as you know your major scales, you can identify the notes fairly quickly, so make sure to write them out first. As a chord symbol, it's often represented by either Maj 7 or a triangle followed by a 7. Here it is isolated. Here are a handful of songs that make distinctive use of the major 7 chord. Take a listen and try to identify that bright jazzy sound. You can see there are many different styles here, including the modern R&B of John Legend, the 19th century classical music of Erik Satie, and the post-punk of the Smiths. Here are some of the chord progressions as examples so you can hear the major 7 in context. The main 3 chords of John Legend's Ordinary People, the subtle use of C major 7 as a transition chord in Lennon's Imagine, and the punky yet jazzy post-chorus of the Smiths' This Charming Man. You probably spotted the minor 7 in there too. 7s of all kinds often go together. If you're using a keyboard, simply use the formula of 1, 3, 5, 7 to extract the correct notes from your major scale and play them together. Another way you can think of it is start on your root note, go up 4 semitones to find your 3rd, 3 semitones from there to find your 5th, and finally another 4 semitones to find your 7th. Or 4, 3, 4 in short. On the guitar, we have a slightly different layout, so I'm going to give you 2 movable shapes you can use to get started. Here's your first shape with its root on the E string. Simply move the shape to the correct root note to find your major 7 chord. For example, if I play the shape from the 10th fret of the E string, it becomes a D major 7. If I play it from the 8th fret, it becomes a C major 7. They work just like your regular major and minor bar chords. Here's another shape with its root on the A string instead. Again, I move the shape to the correct root note on the A string to get my chord. For example, if I play this shape from the 5th fret of the A string, we have a D major 7. But if I play it from the 3rd fret, I have a C major 7. Again, as we've already discussed, the minor 7 chord uses the formula 1, flat 3, 5, flat 7. You can use your major 7 to work it out. Simply flatten the 3rd and the 7th to find your notes. As a chord symbol, it's often represented by either M7 or a dash symbol followed by a 7. The minor 7 is a very versatile chord found in many styles. Here it is isolated. Here are a handful of songs that make distinctive use of the minor 7 chord. Take a listen and try to identify it. Again, there are a variety of styles here, including hip-hop, rock, indie and funk. Here are some of the chord progressions as examples so you can hear the minor 7 in context. The 3 chords that make the main riff of Nelly's Ride With Me, the mix of triads, power chords and minor 7 chords in the verses of Thin Lizzy's The Boys Are Back in Town, and finally the surprisingly folky opening chord of Wonderwall. We don't need to hear the rest of that. If you're using a keyboard, you can use your major 7 formula of 1, 3, 5, 7, then simply flatten that 3rd and 7th. Another way you can think of it is start on your root note, go up 3 semitones to find your flattened 3rd, 4 semitones from there to find your 5th, and finally another 3 semitones to reach your flat 7. Or 3, 4, 3. In short, the opposite of major 7s. On the guitar, here's your first shape with its root on the E string, and here's another with its root on the A string. Once again, the exact minor 7 chord depends on which fret you start. Here's your E string shape played from the 3rd fret giving us G minor 7. And here's the A string shape being played from the 10th fret, also giving us G minor 7. Our final in-depth look will be at the dominant 7, also known as the 7, which features the formula of root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7. Again, you can use your major 7 to work it out. For example, if G major 7 is G, B, D, F sharp, then G7 is G, B, D, F. All we've done is flatten the 7th, F sharp, to become F. As a chord symbol, it's often represented by a lone 7. Whatever you do, do not mix it up with major 7. This by far is the most unstable sounding of our 3 chords. Its slightly dissonant sound is perfect for certain genres. It gives a sense of tension and movement. Once again, here it is isolated. Here are a handful of songs that make distinctive use of the 7 chord. Take a listen and try to identify it. It's been absolutely rinsed by the likes of blues, rock and roll and funk. As a result, it appears nearly everywhere you look. Here are some of the chord progressions as examples. Blue Suede Shoes uses 3 repeated 7 chords in a very typical 12-bar blues and rock progression. Its subtle inclusion as the 2nd chord in Billionaire by Bruno Mars. And finally, the semi-classical sound of B7 to E minor at the end of each verse in Metallica's Nothing Else Matters. If you're using a keyboard, once again you can use your major 7 formula of 1, 3, 5, 7, then simply flatten that 7. If you want to think of it in semitones, start on your root note, go up 4 semitones to find your 3rd, 3 semitones from there to find your 5th, and finally another 3 semitones to reach your flat 7, or 4, 3, 3 in short. On the guitar, here are 2 movable shapes. Here's your first shape with its root on the E string, and here's another with its root on the A string. Here's your E string shape played from the 10th fret giving us D7, and here's the A string shape being played from the 5th fret also giving us D7. Remember that this is just an introduction, but here are some formulas that you can work out for yourself. There's the tense but jazzy minor 7 flat 5, also known as half diminished 7, with its formula of root, flat 3, flat 5, flat 7. There's the minor major 7, also known as the James Bond chord, with a formula of root, flat 3, 5, 7. And the final example, the 7 sus 4 chord, which uses the formula of root, 4th, 5th, and flat 7. Pay attention to the fact that the 4th has replaced the 3rd in that one. The craziest thing is that we haven't even covered half the subject. But for now, let's see how we can absorb these new chords. The aim of learning any chord for the purposes of songwriting and composing is to make it sound natural to you. Let's find out the best ways to absorb them so that one day they'll emerge in your songwriting without thinking. Number 1. Practice them. Here's the most obvious one. Go back through the video and use the formulas and chord shapes to practice finding all your different types of 7 chord. Maybe start by finding every major 7 chord, then every minor 7 chord, then every 7. This will give you both a mental and physical understanding of each chord. Try to analyze where the root, 3rd, 5th and 7th are as you go. Number 2. Invert them. Once you've got an understanding of the basic chord patterns, make your own inversions. You can rearrange the notes of a chord in any order once you know them. It doesn't always have to be root, 3rd, 5th, then 7th. For example, I could play a major 7 starting with the root and 5th, then the 7th with another root the octave above, and finish with the 3rd in the same octave. Maybe I could replace that root note with the 7th instead. There are literally infinite possibilities. You can do it on any instrument you want. Here's the same major 7 chord played 5 different ways on a guitar. Inversions are proof that you really know your chords. You might start to find inversions that you prefer to use. Number 3. Improvise over a single chord. This gives you the chance to explore what works with the chord and what doesn't. Give it some rhythm and try and construct melodies using your voice. And there's no need to make it complicated. You can do this with instruments too. Try and explore different notes, arpeggios, scales, whatever you want. Improvising is songwriting but in real time. Challenge yourself. Number 4. Listen to music that uses sevenths. We've already looked briefly at the use of sevenths in many different styles. Feel free to listen to them in your free time and subconsciously take in the sounds, or listen intently to try and identify them. One of the best styles to listen to in order to understand how to use them is jazz. As mentioned at the start, jazz generally pushes away triads and uses sevenths as its basic chords. Here are some classic jazz musicians to check out. You might find something that inspires you. Number 5. Learn songs that use them. This will give you the chance to physically get to grips with the concept. Go back through the examples and try to play along. Jazz standards such as Autumn Leaves or Take the A Train are perfect for throwing yourself into the deep end of sevenths. See if you can get hold of a collection of jazz standards such as a real book and go through each song one by one. Number 6. Write using seventh chords. Finally, the whole reason that you're here. Don't be afraid to dive in and try some of these chords in your own progressions. But to make the process smoother, let's look at some quick tips. Jumping from basic major and minor chords to sevenths isn't as complicated as we think. Thanks to the use of seventh chords in experimental music such as jazz and house, it's actually very difficult to go wrong with them. But here are some quick ideas to start with. Replace those triads with sevenths. Why don't you take one of those many chord progressions that you have featuring triads and replace them with sevenths instead? For example, here is my original progression of E, C sharp minor, A and B. It's nice enough, but let's change it to an E major 7, C sharp minor 7, A major 7 and B7 instead. Suddenly it's got a brand new flavour. But not every chord needs to be changed. How about we keep our E and A as regular major chords and have C sharp minor 7 and B7 as our 7s? All it does in this case is just add a little bit of spice to our progression. Take it one chord at a time. If a chord sounds better as a simple major or minor triad, leave it be. Try a new style. As we've seen, seventh chords can fit into nearly any style, but maybe you could deliberately try writing in a style that makes heavy use of seventh chords. Maybe you can try writing blues, funk, jazz or R&B. This will make it much easier to find the right place for them. Even if this isn't your personal style, it can only augment and improve your songwriting. Finally, one chord at a time. Don't try to rush or overcomplicate things. You don't have to use every single seventh chord that you know. Remind yourself of our earlier chord progressions. The majority only contained 1 or 2 seventh chords in a sea of triads. And those 1 or 2 sevenths always made a world of difference. Try to follow the example of those songs. Use the seventh chord as a means to catch the attention of the listener. Here's a great example of that at the end of each verse in Under the Bridge by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. After the repeated chord progression of E, B, C sharp minor, G sharp minor and A, we're suddenly struck with a sustained E major 7 chord which stands out a mile. The fact that the chord is left to ring out also emphasises its importance. That way you can't miss it. Practice the hell out of your seventh chords, and when you're comfortable with the patterns and shapes, write your own music using them. Riffs, chord progressions, verses, choruses, entire songs. Experiment as much as you want. Don't forget you can watch this video as many times as you need in case you forget something. Don't be afraid to write things down. Feel free to comment your own writing tips, your music with sevenths, your own inversions, whatever you want. Stay tuned for more lessons on music theory and songwriting. Thanks for watching Inner Songwriting Theory.